One of my favorite authors is a guy named Charles Spurgeon. I like him not just because he had a great beard and loved good cigars. He was a great preacher and a great pastor in the 1800s. In fact, he's sometimes called the Prince of Preachers at a time when sermons were for the highly educated and were very complex. He spoke in very simple ways that everyone could understand. People flocked to hear him and always wanted to read his sermons. He published some 49 volumes of sermons and teachings over his life. By the time he was 22 years old, he was preaching to an auditorium that sat 10,000 people in the 1800s. Plus, there was standing room on top of that. One Sunday, as he was just beginning to preach, someone as a joke yelled, "Fire!" And the whole place ran into a panic. More than 10,000 people tried to get out of the exits, and 7 people were trampled to death on that Sunday morning. Many, many more than that were injured in the process. Charles Spurgeon, who had been a person always who was depressed and who was fairly melancholy, went into a very serious depression after that. It took him weeks to recover and really come back to himself again. He took a lot of heat in the papers because they said he was a charlatan, said that he had put all those people in danger, that it was somehow his fault that this had happened. He was involved in several controversies theologically with the church people of his day. He was very opposed to slavery at a time in England where it was not popular to say that slavery was wrong. In addition to taking heat in the media, in addition to his depression, he was a man who dealt constantly with pain. He had very serious gout that left him in bed many days. He had rheumatism, and he also had Bright's disease, which is an inflammation of the kidneys. His wife, after giving him twin children, had something go wrong. We're not quite sure what, but she basically became an invalid. And he had to raise his 2 children and had to take care of his wife on top of all of the preaching and all the ministry that he did. Charles Spurgeon was a person that was acquainted with sadness and with depression. He understood them, he had been around them, and yet somehow in the middle of it, in the middle of all the pain he felt, he was a person that could express in very clear ways the hope we have in Jesus Christ. And I'm not always sure how he could do that. How could you feel that much pain? How could you experience that much loss, that much pressure, and still constantly find hope? Psalm 119, verses 105 through 112. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. I have sworn an oath and confirmed it, to keep your righteous rules. I am severely afflicted. Give me life, O Lord, according to your word. Accept my free will offerings of praise, O Lord, and teach me your rules. I hold my life in my hand continually, but I do not forget your law. The wicked have laid a snare for me, but I do not stray from your precepts. Your testimonies are my heritage forever, for they are the joy of my heart. I incline my heart to perform your statutes forever, to the end. We're here in a funeral home. This is one of the places we all associate with pain, with sorrow, and with grief. But I don't know if you've noticed this, but I do a fair amount of funerals, and I've noticed fewer and fewer people come to the funeral home. I see funerals getting smaller and smaller, and fewer families want to go to the graveside. If they do a funeral at all, they just want to do something short, and they don't want to see where the person is being buried. It's like we're expected to not feel the things we should be feeling when we're at a funeral. How many of you have gone through something and you get the bad advice of, well, everything will be okay, and you'll be back to normal before you know it? We live in a society where you can go to a funeral on Saturday and you're expected to be back to work on Monday. That's not the same all over the world. There are places where if you lose someone significant, you're expected to take a couple weeks to a month off to actually grieve. In the Bible, when there's a loss, you put on sackcloth and itchy material and you cover yourself in ashes and you experience the grief on the outside to help you understand and connect with the pain you have on the inside. We live in a society that wants to keep pain and sorrow and grief at arm's length. And that's a problem, because then when you come to a funeral like this, it's not just feeling the pain of the loss you're currently dealing with. You end up feeling all the pain built up from all these other funerals that you never really let yourself experience in the first place. That is not good. It's not good for your health. It is not good for your soul. One of the things I appreciate about Charles Spurgeon is he was willing to talk about his depression. He was willing to talk about his struggles. He wrote a book that was put together with lectures that he did with students, called Lectures to My Students. And it's basically just training for pastors on all kinds of stuff, from hand gestures, there's a chapter on hand gestures, to how you organize your world as a pastor. But there's one essay in there that I read at least twice a year called The Minister's Fainting Fits. It's written for pastors, so I doubt you've ever read it, but maybe you should, because it's the best thing I've ever read on sorrow and depression. What he says is that there's all kinds of circumstances where pastors feel down and feel brought down. These fainting fits, these moments where our courage is no longer there. He said there's right before a victory, right after a victory, when we are have been at it for a long time, when we have been betrayed by somebody. There's all these moments where a pastor naturally feels this drop in courage, this drop in faith. And I have found that in my life, and I have found it is not just pastors. We all go through these moments of sadness and of grief where we feel our faith diminish, where we feel our courage and our strength fade. And Spurgeon writes this essay and just acknowledges it. And the last paragraph is one of the most beautiful things I've ever read about suffering. He starts out, "Be not surprised by soul pain, by soul dismay." He said it's just a part of life. It's a part of ministry. Understand it, that it's going to happen, and accept it as normal. He says, don't put your trust in feelings. We feel up and we feel down and we feel good and we feel bad. And Spurgeon says, so what? Don't let your feelings determine everything. Realize that your feelings are going to go up and down, and don't trust in them. Trust in your faith that goes beyond feelings. He says, sure, we're going to walk in the dark sometimes. But he said, faith gives us the gift, even though we're walking in the dark, to walk surely. It's like our psalm said, that God's word is a lamp to our feet and a light into our path. If you think about it, that's not a lot of light. God doesn't give us the whole path ahead of us. God simply gives us the next step, the next couple feet, and we walk that, and God gives us some more. We can trust that God holds us under the shadow of our wings. I don't know if that takes away all of our sorrow and all of our pain. We feel a lot of that grief, and we can't help it. But it's helped me over the years to know that it's normal, to know that it comes and goes, and to know that other people have struggled with it too, that you and I are not alone when we are going through grieving. But that ultimately what we have to do in these moments and in these times is just trust, no matter how we feel, no matter what we're going through, to simply trust. And for Spurgeon to write that, when he's been through so much pain and heartache, when he's seen these people get trampled in his church, when he's taking hits from the media and in his reputation, for him to struggle with pain his whole life and still believe that you can trust, still believe that you can find strength under the shadow of God's wings, gives us a different sense of hope in dark times. It's my prayer that His words and His courage would strengthen you when you go through your fainting fits.